To Christine Lagarde, I wish to say thank you for her work, for her presence, for her input. The ministers of finance of the G20 have a lot of work to do. And I want to pay tribute also to Mr. Steinbrück, the German Minister of Finance, and not only because he gave me stamps, which was a very kind gesture on his part, but also because he has been extremely helpful in our work. You see, there's a method, there's a time frame, and there is someone in charge for each one of the measures we've decided upon. I won't go into the details of this because you'll see for yourselves that this document encompasses a wide range of measures. Now, of course, if you have questions, I'm ready to happy to answer them before I return to France. Yes, yes, the floor is yours, gentlemen, ladies.
Arnaud Le Parmentier, Le Monde.
Arnaud Le Parmentier, Le Monde. On the OECD, the fact that you put the ball back in the OECD court, is this due to the fact that China and Brazil in particular do not want this or to join the publication of this list? And do you have some technique as to how are you going to divide between the blacklist, the grey list and other lists? So how is this going to develop in the future? Look, Brazil, Mr. Le Parmentier, was not the problem. The problem stemmed from the fact simply that in order not to be on the OECD blacklist, memory, you have to have signed bilateral disclosure agreements between the source country or the target country and at least 12 other states. Sorry for the detail, the technical detail, but this is quite precise. And for technical reasons, I believe Brazil has only signed 2 such bilateral agreements. But Brazil certainly raised no difficulties in referring to the OECD list. Now, to be perfectly honest with you on the subject of China, well, President Hu Jintao and I met late last night for bilateral reasons, but also on this matter. This is a traditional position of China's, namely not to accept the rules of bodies of which it is not a member. Well, that's understandable, you know. But after we had a 3-way discussion, may seem strange, but that's the way it was, President Hu Jintao, President Obama and myself, we reached an agreement. The OECD is coming out with the list today, it's publishing the list today, and the G20 takes note of this. Now, this may seem a little arcane, but don't forget how different the positions were initially. But had the G20 published the list itself, it would have been the same OECD list, because we don't have, the G20 doesn't have an administration, as it were. Whether it'd be the G20 or the OECD publishing this list, it's still the same thing because it's the same list. And I think it's very important because I think it's the first time that China agrees to refer in some way or another to a body of which it is not a member. So that's what we've achieved. Work is going to continue because the Ministers of Finance will be attending the IMF's assembly in a fortnight's time, and the G20 ministers entrusted with the task of completing the list of sanctions against non-cooperating centres, in other words, tax havens, on the basis of what we've decided. Now, of course, when you've got 20 heads of state and government, and not to mention our Sherpas, we went into as much detail as possible, but obviously the list, the exact list of sanctions, has to be examined by the Ministers of Finance of the G20 states in order to put the finishing touches to it. And lastly, Monsieur Le Parmentier, as to gauging the results of all this, where we're in April, in New York in September, there will be a G20 alongside, irrespective, I mean, it's got nothing to do with the General Assembly of the United Nations, and in September, the Ministers of Finance of the G20 countries will give us an evaluation of the results achieved. Remember this sentence: the age or the era of banking secrecy is over. Mr. President, you threatened to leave. Had you not achieved certain things? Do you think this contributed to moving things along? Well, there was tension, I tell you, there was tension in the room up until half an hour ago, but Who could imagine? Who could have imagined that cultures as widely differing as and interests as widely differing sometimes, because you have the recognize the fact that since Bretton Woods, the world is living on the basis of a particular financial model. Now, of course, I'm not criticizing it, but that is the Anglo-Saxon model with its advantages, its pros and cons. But evidently today, we've turned the page, a page. Now, the fact that we should have been very open and candid is not something I deny. But if your question is this, had France and Germany not demanded results of this nature, would we have achieved them as spontaneously? Well, look, what do you think on the basis of your own experience? But I also have to be honest. Gordon Brown played a very excellent role, and President Obama, I recognize, helped me enormously on this issue of tax havens. I mean, there were enough of us in the room for you to be able to ask others about what happened. And I must also say that President Hu Jintao, who has a rather firm position, maintained that position right until the end, was kind enough to consider that to refer to the publication of a list by the OECD in the communiqué was something which I simply could not give up on. And I defended what I believed and also what the Chancellor Merkel believes. Pierre Copé from Télévision Suisse Romande, Mr. President. Eva Van Dor, Associated Press. This is the first international meeting attended by President Obama. How did you find him? And how do you compare him to his predecessor? No, says the President, frankly. Even with your delightful accent, I am not going to compare them. Each has his qualities. I found him a very open man, very open-minded. Entirely in line with what we want, and namely that politicians shoulder their responsibilities and face up to their responsibilities. So far, this had been somewhat relegated to the field of experts and in particular accountants. And frankly, things went very well, very smoothly. And we're going to do good work together, and I'm looking forward to welcome him as of tomorrow morning in Strasbourg. Mr. President, do the G20 members have a timetable for putting the crisis behind them? I mean, have you looked at this? Did you look at this? Well, of course we did. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, as he heads the IMF, talked about his forecasts and the figures that you will see and read in the communiqué. In terms of job creation, for instance, we had a long debate on whether or not we should actually refer to specific figures. These are the results of the analysis conducted by international organizations. We had the president of the World Bank. We had the director general of the WTO. We had the DG of the IMF. And they themselves told us what were the models on which they were working with a turn-up sometime during the course of 2010. But, of course, that's important for us to listen to them. We want to get out of this crisis as swiftly as possible, but we also have to take decisions. You may wish to comment on this, and experts will no doubt talk about it, but we need to take decisions now. What is our rationale? It's the financial crisis that led to an economic crisis, not the reverse. And this financial crisis was the result of an absence, a paucity of rules. The lack of rules led to a lack of confidence. So what we say is, look, let's have new rules in order to sort out the financial crisis, in order to restore confidence, and in order to kickstart the economy. Now, when is the economy going to start turning up again? Well, we have a good example in France in the automotive industry.